Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Wednesday, and that means Epic Comic Book Wednesday, when Michael K. Vaughan and I combine the forces of Stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we have wasted our youths. This started out as an innocent little feature on Mike's channel. He occasionally likes to do regular features on his channel. He was going to take you through his epic collections, Marvel's paperback full-color reprint line. And I saw that and horned my way in. I said, hey, I'd like to do this. You and I can do this together. This is an endemic threat that applies to all booktubers. But since I horned my way in, he gets to pick what we talk about. And over the time that we've been doing this, the four of you who've been watching these videos have rubbed your hands together at that prospect, because if he's picking and our tastes don't perfectly align, that means sometimes we will disagree. Sometimes we will disagree. Sometimes he will let me know, here's the thing we're talking about this week, isn't it great? And it'll be something like Omega the Unknown, or ROM, Space Knight, or Space Truckers, or something like that. Something that he thinks is the bee's knees, but that's actually god-awful. And today, believe it or not, is one of those things. I'm sure that it is. I'm sure that he hates this book. He picked it. But I think he probably picked it in order to bash it. I, once again, have not watched his video ahead of time. I really should wait and do that, because I always get a lot of fun things to say about whatever he says, but I think I can guess. I think I can guess what he says about the thing today. And the comic, the irony of us disagreeing today, comes from the fact that we both love the source material. This is actually an update of a pulp character. This is Howard Chaykin from the 1980s. This is The Shadow, Blood and Judgment, which was originally 4 issues and then was collected into a graphic novel. And this has been reprinted at least once that I know of after that. This is Howard Chaykin writing and drawing an updated reimagining of the great pulp character, The Shadow. Really only 2 quasi-superheroes emerged from the pulps. There was The Shadow and there was Doc Savage. They were both templates for the thing that would come in less than a decade for each of them, which is a superhero incarnation of both. The superhero incarnation of The Shadow was the Batman, and the superhero incarnation of Doc Savage was Superman, right down to them sharing a first name. But they were the 2 creatures of the pulp era. And that's where the similarity stops. The Shadow had a weird, tangled beginning as a character, as most of these pulp creations did. The ones that weren't created by one man have a very tangled beginning with lots and lots of revamps and remakings that weren't even acknowledged, and that only Michael K. Vaughan probably knows all the details of. In this case, there was a show. It would be hard to explain the popularity of omnibus crime shows at the time. The crime rate, the violent crime rate in the United States is virtually non-existent now. When those crime syndicate shows were coming out, the violent crime rate in the United States was something like 45%. So it was understandable that readers would find that luridly interesting. And one of those anthology shows, just for the producers, just a whim of the producers, they decided to have it introduced by a character who knows all, who sees all, a character who is only called The Shadow. The producers thought nothing more of it than that, but fans were more interested in The Shadow than they were in, that flat-footed cop, Officer O'Flaherty or whatever. They wanted to know more and more about The Shadow. So The Shadow eventually was born as a freestanding character by a writer named Walter Gibson, who introduced a whole bunch of standard gimmicks about the character. And it took off. It was a huge, huge success on the radio, and then in the pulps. And after a while, it was taken over by a guy named Ted Tinsley, who altered the tone just a bit, increased a lot of the weirdness, and also a lot of the violence. The Shadow became much more violent. That was when the point of the story subtly shifted from the fact that he could meld into the darkness and sway men's minds with his steely, unblinking glare. There was an element of that Gibson did that was really effective, where you've got people, crooks, collaborating, colluding, figuring out what they're going to do, conspiring in a room, and there are shadows in that room, and suddenly one of them is inhabited. One of those shadows is inhabited by someone. You don't know exactly when he got in the room, and you're kind of amazed that they don't know he's there, but they don't. That was very effectively done, but as Tinsley took over and wrote, pulp adventures of this character, the point started to shift as well to the guns, to the Shadow as an avenger of crime, as a character who, the radio drama said, the weed of crime bears bitter fruit. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows. Very, very effective, pulpy stuff. And it sort of limped off from there in the 1940s. The pulp characters cannot survive transplantation out of the pulp era. That is the big limitation of this book, is that pulp characters really can't survive that. Especially the two signature ones. It just doesn't work. They have to have a greater elasticity built into them, or they won't be able to survive. And that greater elasticity, as we see from Superman and Batman, takes the form of wearing your underwear on the outside. Simple as that. If the Shadow or Doc Savage had done that, they'd be around today. But the Shadow had lots of adherents. And so the character was given a run of comic books that was actually, Mike would know better. I believe from memory that it was fairly short. And very good. Good artwork, a very good sense of the 1930s world. This is not that. This was Howard Chaykin, who was already a bit of a star when he did this. This was Howard Chaykin taking this character and updating the whole concept, which in the context of this story means explaining the whole concept, which we didn't have, not particularly for the Shadow. We didn't really even know who he was. Is he a man named Kent Allard, or is he a feckless playboy named Lamont Cranston? Which is he? Is attributed to both. And you're not really sure whose identity is he adopting, and does he have one of his own? Howard Chaykin decided to grapple with that storyline by shifting it forward in time from the 40s to the 80s. The Shadow has been gone. He disappears in 1949. And his Confederates, the Shadow, much like Doc Savage, had a crew of operatives of all kinds of New York stereotypes. You get the hard-bitten broad and the cab driver and the fast-talking dispatch operator, the newsboy flunky, etc., etc., etc. It's no more effective with the Shadow than it ever was with Doc Savage, for the same reason. You're reading a Gibson Shadow story, and all you want is more of the Shadow. You're not really all that interested in all of the operatives. And Tinsley the same way, and some of the Shadow books that I've read, the Shadow barely makes an appearance. It's all those people. Understandable in a way, and for the same reason as Doc Savage. If the Shadow is at the front and center of the story, you're going to have to work a lot harder to challenge the character, to make suspense believable, because the character is not completely human. Same thing with Doc Savage. His aides and assistants can get conked on the head all the time. They can be baffled by a mystery or a seeming supernatural creature, but Clark Savage will not be. So you get these interesting, one-dimensional, monochrome, bungling squads of operatives. And in the setup to this story, we are in the 1980s, and the Shadow's operatives are now old people. They are all senior citizens, and they are one by one being gruesomely murdered. Someone is gruesomely murdering the old assistants of the Shadow. I will give you a couple of the gruesome murders, just so that you know. One is shot and pinioned to the wall with an arrow. That wouldn't happen. Needless to say, that the picture that you're looking at is not possible. There is no way to position the body so that you can shoot it that way. There is no way that the body would hold the arrow up that way. There's no way the blood would splash that way. There's no way the head would turn that way. It's just Howard Chaykin walking into an apartment of a friend, seeing something like that set up and thinking, hey, that'd be cool. Same thing with Howard Chaykin occasionally making his way to the editorial offices of DC Comics and walking down the hallway towards the major employee lounge. In a little alcove in the hallway, there was an old-fashioned water cooler where people would stand around and complain about the fact that, Archie Goodwin's such a jerk or whatever. And in this one of the Shadow's old assistants is found stuffed inside one of those water bottles. That is not possible. That could not happen. Especially it could not be done by the people that we subsequently learn are doing these killings. They could not possibly do it, and they could not, even if they did a version of it, they couldn't do it unseen. And a couple of the Shadow's old operatives are left. They're old men, and one of them is we deal with the next generation. We have to deal with the next generation in this graphic novel because 40 years have passed. So we meet the toughest nails, hard-talking descendant of one of the Shadow's operatives. Harry's granddaughter is a policewoman. She's a federal operative. She's looking at all of these names of these senior citizens who've been brutally murdered, and suddenly she puts two and two together and realizes that her grandfather is in serious danger. And she goes to save him. We're getting little glimpses here. While this is going on, we're getting little glimpses of Mayrock Industries, which is, I don't know if you're going to be able to make this out. I don't know if you're going to want to be able to make this out. We'll get to this. We have to talk about what you are to expect if you read a Howard Chaykin comic book, especially if he's in complete editorial control, as he was with this thing. Mayrock Industries is up to some weird things. You just get a glimpse of it. You're not supposed to worry about it much. We get two subplots that are unfolding as this is happening. One is little glimpses of Mayrock Industries and how thoroughly horrible it is. And the other is a white man in jodhpurs and two Oriental young men leaving China, passing through China on their way to the West. Don't know anything about that either, but then we cut to the Shadow, and we are expecting that this is what the Shadow will be. Of course, 40 years have passed, so the Shadow will be a really capable, really savvy old man, and we think that he is in big trouble because the punks that have killed off a number of the Shadow's other operatives are now after him. But he has a gun, and he knows how to use it. Before his granddaughter can even help him, he is lunging out of the Shadow Knows van and chasing them off. Now, they are just ordinary punks. So how did they get a body inside a water cooler refilling bottle? How did they do that? How did they get inside a security-type penthouse in order to pinion a guy against a rooftop with an arrow? We're never told. They're just picturesque. They're just picturesque murders. That's all. So we move to once Harry is saved, he confers with his granddaughter, realizes what's happening. She fills him in that all these other operatives have been killed, and they go to the palatial estate of Margot Lane, who was the principal girlfriend of the Tinsley Shadow, one version, not a little bit in the Gibson, and then mostly in the Tinsley Shadow. There is Margot Lane. She is kind of a love interest. She's certainly there to be rescued. She's now an old woman, and they all gather together to talk to her about what's going on with these agents, and maybe try to figure out whether or not they themselves are in danger. They obviously are in danger. She is bitter about the Shadow. it's not really a surprise to her that even all these years later, she would still be paying a high price for ever having associated with him. She says, when he disappeared in 49 without even a goodbye, I fell apart. It took a good and decent man, the late Dr. Forsyth, to put me together, and I refused to get sucked into that maelstrom of violence again. But it's too late, because they all hear the signature laugh of the Shadow. The thing about the Shadow is the icy cold laugh that was immortalized in radio and in the books. Chaykin presents it as these ha-ha-has in the background. And we expect, at the end of this first issue, we know what we're going to see, and we don't see it. Instead, we see a young man casting an ominous, noticeable shadow. He is not dressed in the slouch hat and the red scarf and the long trench coat, the long black trench coat. Instead, he's dressed as a normal person. And he greets them in his old house and explains to them where he's been, starting with 1922 and revealing to them that his name is Kent Allard and that he knew a man named Lamont Cranston who was thoroughly awful, a thoroughly evil human being, just kills several people in this second issue. The plane, he forces Kent Allard to fly a biplane, and while they're in flight, the plane crashes. And they seem both to be dead men, but they don't. They wake up, lovely Chaykin artwork here, they wake up in a mystical kingdom called Shambala that is hidden high in the Himalayas. It's a little bit confusing. Kent Allard was badly mangled in the crash and has been somewhat rebuilt, reconstituted by the people in Shambala who possess a super advanced science. So he's not quite the same as he was before. You can sort of see him noticing it in this panel. Whereas Kent Allard, he has the Kent Allard luck and was largely untouched in the crash. So he has not been augmented. And he wants to use the advanced science of Shambhala for his own personal ends. And flees with that regard. He overpowers the lead female scientist of the city. He rapes her, and it's not thought of, either by him or by her, as anything more than catching a cold from a stranger. And again, we will get to the things you have to think about when you read a Howard Chaykin book. He doesn't get far before Kent Allard catches up with him and knocks him into a bottomless crevasse. and he rescues the female scientist, and she says, "We owe you one," and he has a repayment in mind, which is that they continue with the enhancements that they've done to him, that they make him more than human. And in one panel only, just that, half of one page, we get that. We get them making him more than human. This one panel contains more explanation, more exposition about the Shadow and what his capabilities are than we had seen in 80 years of radio and comic books and pulp novels. We're told, first, we will teach you to tap the dormant recesses of your mind, to truly see for the first time, to hone the flesh of your corporeal body to the resiliency of organic steel, and to move like an uncoiled spring, and to meld these two disciplines, the physical and the metaphysical, into the third path, the way of the shadow warrior. Finally, you will leave Shambhala not as an outsider, rather as an ambassador. And there he is, as the Shadow, fighting evil in the 1930s. But he decides that his quest is not a long-term thing. He talks with him. Let me get you a page here. He's talking with his various aides, and also with the granddaughter of one of his aides, who calls him a thoroughly unreconstructed sexist because he, according to Chaykin, is still operating in the mind frame of the 1930s when men didn't take guff from women. I think my own parents would have had something to say about that, but you're getting the point here, which is that there's going to be all sorts of authorial baggage that you're going to have to deal with if you read a Howard Chaykin story. This is true of any story where Chaykin has editorial control. Just to quickly go through the rest of the plot. The Shadow comes back. He was the man in Jodhpurs who was leaving the mystical kingdom of Shambala in the Himalayas and traveling through China with the two young Oriental men who are his sons from a marriage with a sweet, docile woman in Shambala. The three of them have come to the West because they want to figure out who is killing off the Shadow's old operatives. It's never made explicitly clear how the Shadow would know this was happening. We can assume he has another operative later on in the story. She's introduced. Her name is Lorelei. For some reason, she's in an iron lung and is assisted by chimpanzees. But maybe she has a way to contact him. It seems unlikely to me that anyone would have a way to contact him. It seems, from his own description, like he cut things pretty short. But nevertheless, he does somehow know, and that is what has drawn him out of hiding, and that is important because the leader of Mayrock Industries is actually an old, enfeebled Lamont Cranston who wants to draw him out of seclusion in order to get him to bring Lamont Cranston back to Shambhala, which has hidden itself from the world now, because he's really sick. As he says, he's dying of everything, and he has clone bred a gigantic, physically perfect body of himself. Big imbecilic oaf in a tuxedo. He wants the two of them, he wants the Shadow to bring the two of them to Shambhala so that he can have his brain transferred into that body. And I guess be healthy again. I don't really know. The Shadow wants to get to the bottom of this, but first he has to set his own house in order, and that involves another quirk on Chaykin's part, which is rampant sexism. You're going to get, in a Chaykin book where he's in complete control, you're going to get a lot of sadomasochistic violence, far in excess of what it needs to be. Bodies running rivers of blood. Grotesque, on-point violence. This makes the action sequences really good, because you know that real things are at stake. People are going to bleed. People are going to get seriously hurt, the good guys and the bad guys. But that's not all you get of it. A lot of it is just thrown in because Chaykin likes it. Because you might even think, in a 1970s kind of way, he gets off on it. Same thing is true with the sexism and the weird kinkery that happens throughout everything that he does. You can't go without it. You just can't go without it. I think one of the only times I've ever seen that was a little run that he did on Captain America, where I imagine the editors are watching him like a hawk. But one of the little notes here, trust me, in the 1980s, it leaped out a mile. Please don't think that we were all unreconstructed, knuckle-dragging misogynists in the 1980s. In the 1980s, this one word leaped out a mile. Because in between while the Shadow is starting to impose his will on the world of the underworld and figure out what is going on with his dead or disappeared agents, he's also suborning young Margot, who thinks of him as an unreconstructed male chauvinist pig, until he sleeps with her. And then, with the scene that we get, she's calling him master. And believe me, that one word leapt off the page 45 years ago. Leapt off the page. There may have been some male readers who read that in 1985 or 89 or whatever and thought, yeah, cool. But I guarantee you most of them thought, oh, come on. Oh, come on. There is no reason for that at all. I feel soiled reading this now. Now that I know that I am reading, at least in part, some of the author's fantasies, some of the author's own fantasies, which is really kind of gross. But it does happen. She becomes one of his agents. Yes, there's Lorelei in her with her monkey assistants. She becomes his servant, one of his operatives, same as the others. None of the others really call him master in this book. In some incarnations of the Shadow, especially for Gibson, they do. Back in the 30s, they do call him master a lot of the time. None of them do now. None of his older operatives do now. I guess maybe because we're supposed to believe they're so angry with him for leaving them high and dry in 1949 that they don't remember proper respect. He actually says so. I wonder if I can find the exact panel. It's an insight, at least anyway, into how Chaykin views the character. Because Cranston sounds mournful. He says, "Times have changed. I remember when my word was law, untested, unquestioned, but times have changed." Yeah, yeah, just a bit. All of this is leading up to a confrontation at Mayrock Industries. There's no way around that. The Shadow infiltrates the place. There's some really good. Look at what Chaykin does with his panel arrangements. You really just don't know what you're going to get next. You don't know. It's got a weird forward energy to it, but you don't know. It's not standard comic book action sequences, which is really kind of neat. But eventually he's going to confront Lamont Cranston. And here we get a whole bunch of Chaykin kinks all in one scene. Cranston has a tactical nuclear warhead pointed at Manhattan to force the Shadow to do what he wants, which is to take him and his gigantic body double to Shambala for a brain transplant. The young woman is just turned on by both the Shadow and the idea of thermonuclear annihilation. She is a nihilistic vampire of a type that is almost unavoidable in a Howard Chaykin production. Almost unavoidable. The big body double, I want to get you to a sequence here. The big body double, she's telling the Shadow, she's confessing to the Shadow that she has always had the hots for him. The two of them are supposed to be married. But she's confessing to the Shadow that she's always had the hots for him. And the big body double, he's dim as a brick, but he is noticing that. And it's making him more and more alarmed and angry until finally he crushes her head. We assume he pops it like a balloon. I'm curious to know, she's making all of this. I'm not going to read you the dialogue that she gives, but the dialogue that she gives about being hot for the Shadow and thermonuclear death and whatnot is, it's crude, but it's nuanced. And yet this gigantic guy is understanding it. He's understanding that the woman who's supposed to marry him is professing sexual attraction for someone else, and that causes her to pop her head like a balloon. But he doesn't seem to have ever understood the whole idea of a brain transplant, which means his brain would not be transplanted into a sick and dying 90-year-old body. It would be flushed down a toilet. He doesn't seem to understand that. He seems perfectly okay to go to Shambala and have his brain cut out. But it doesn't work. The Shadow does not care about the thermonuclear weapon pointed at Manhattan. He does not care about any of the guns pointed at him or anything like that. Instead, he says, "You're gibbering, Cranston. Hysterical. I think you lost any grip you had on reality the moment you forced your girlfriend out of the tri-motor at gunpoint. The only possible circumstances under which I would bring you to Shambala would be in shackles or dead." So that's the end of it. He's not going to cooperate under any circumstances, and he doesn't. There is a suitably graphic, bloody confrontation between him and the big man mountain, but the Shadow's not going to lose. And it turns out that he's back. We get a final panel of the Shadow literally looming over Manhattan because he's back, and God help the guilty. Which you can see right away from that plot what this is meant to do. This is meant to set the Shadow up as a functioning character in the present day. In other words, it's doomed to failure because you cannot move these characters out of the pulp era. They're very effective in the pulp era, but they don't work at all in the modern era. This was done, as you can see, by DC. And DC, believe it or not, had already tried this a couple of times. Denny O'Neil loved this character. And so 2 times in the old Batman comic strip, he had the Shadow return and meet Batman. The first time that happens has a beautiful Mike Kaluta cover, but the Shadow is an old man. He's not a miraculously preserved Kent Allard who has been in Shambala and out of the flow of time all this time. Instead, he's older. He's a generation older than Bruce Wayne. That is just politely ignored here. I'm sure that Chaykin knew about those 2 issues. I'm sure that he did. One was in a big Batman family super-sized special. It was just a 7-page story. But the other one, the first one, where Batman and the Shadow meet with Irv Novick artwork, was a full-page comic. And I'm sure that Chaykin was aware of it. Everybody in the world was aware when Mike Kaluta did a cover with the Shadow on it. So I'm sure that he was aware of that issue, probably read it. And in this reboot, he just ignores it. This is a different kind of Shadow. And he also takes the bull by the horns when it comes to those weird, conflicting details about the Shadow's origin story. He looks at Gibson and Tinsley and decides, well, what if I can make one story out of this? What if the reason why there's the name both Kent Allard and Lamont Cranston is because they were 2 different people? Okay, and while he's doing that, he also has to figure out, well, who is the Shadow? How does he cloud the minds of men? How does he know what evil lurks in the hearts of men? I had better give him an origin story. Now, I haven't seen Mike's video, but I'm betting that chaps his hide. I'm betting that it does. He has no problem. Pulp fans, and he's the biggest pulp fan in the world, pulp fans don't have any problem with origin stories when it comes to superheroes. But it really bothers them when it comes to pulp characters. They really don't like that. Now, in Doc Savage, through his own recitation and through the exposition dumps in his first adventure, we get his origin story. We know why he is so special, and over the course of novels, it is revealed how special he is. That he is definitely just a couple of steps over the border of being superhuman. We don't really get a lot of that about the Shadow until now, until this, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I thought this was just terrific. And I'm getting the impression that from message exchanges with Mike that I've done, I get the impression that the reason this doesn't bother me is because I don't care all that much about the Shadow as a pulp character. I'm pretty sure that's probably the root of our disagreement here, and I think that if Mike were a little bit less generous of a soul, when I was a little cavalier about, oh, this is fun, come on, this is terrific, he could have brought up John Byrne's Man of Steel and watched all the color drain out of my face at the prospect of someone ham-handedly updating something that didn't need updating. Maybe he didn't bring it up because it's possible that deep down inside, even though he's a John Byrne guy, he's from the John Byrne generation, I bet he hates Man of Steel too. But nevertheless, my guess is that he's going to have nothing but negative things to say about this. All I want to say I understand that completely. And DC tried to do something of the same thing with Doc Savage, and it failed completely. Despite having Joe Kubert artwork, or Andy Kubert artwork, it failed completely. That Doc Savage reboot had the original miniseries that rebooted the character for the present day, his grandson, had exactly one terrific visual sequence, and that's it. One visual sequence, 2 panels on 1 page that recalled something of the marvel of the old Doc Savage world. This, I would argue, has a lot more than that. I don't think Chaykin much cares about the Shadow as a character, but I think there are moments and scenes in here that are good. This is a storytelling template of, let's bring the old magic back. Let's confront the new, debased world with an older, purer morality. I'm a sucker for that kind of storyline, and that's what this is. The only problem with it, and it's a major problem, is that Chaykin brings in all the rest of his garbage. He brings in all of the sadomasochism. He brings in all of the sexism and the misogyny. He brings in all of the racism. I don't want to stress this too much, but at one point late in this miniseries, the 2 sons of the Shadow mentioned that because they're his sons, they are considered half-breed lesser beings in Shambala. Here in the normal world, they're like Supermen, but at home, they would be looked down upon, which really makes you think that Shambhala is not that advanced a place after all. I think you just have to put up with this. For Chaykin in his prime. Howard Chaykin, I believe, is still alive, and I believe he's still doing stuff. He's still getting work, but none of it's any good. But I believe this is good. If you were to do a big omnibus hardcover volume of great Howard Chaykin work, I think this would earn a right of place to be there, along with his weird Black Hawk version. And also American Flag, which sooner or later Mike and I will get to. so this is this is tough. I have a feeling that Mike's video will just be a simple condemnation of this, and I'm not comfortable just wholeheartedly recommending it myself. All I'm trying to say in a counterbalance to a complete condemnation of this was that it does have effective moments in it. There are good, effective moments in it. Even, I bet, oh my God, I bet that Mike hates this moment most of all. But I love this sequence where Lamont Cranston or Kent Allard or whoever he is, the shadow appears. I love the subtle artistic choice to have that shadow behind him. I love the 1-2 punch, the unexpectedness of him appearing in the room, but not as the shadow. I think that's really neat. Especially since you've already, in this issue, this first issue, you've already had the switcheroo because you see Harry dressed as the shadow, and he's not the shadow. But you at first think that maybe he is because you've seen the shadow in DC Comics before as an old man. I like it. I thought I was sold by the end of this first issue. It was only at the second issue with that master business that I thought, this is going to be a Howard Chaykin production, isn't it? And it was, but I still think it was effective. So, well, this week is a disagreement in Epic Comic Book Wednesday. We'll see what next week is. You never know. I never know with Michael K. Vaughan. Knowing that we disagree about this thing fundamentally, is he going to swing one way next week and pick something he knows we both love? Or is he going to swing the other way and pick another thing where he's sure there'll be a disagreement? We shall see. I don't know any more than you do. So I'll wrap this up and we will convene next Wednesday, all 5 of us. Thank you, BookTube.